Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Rampo Noir, a Japanese anthology horror film from 2005. I briefly covered this in a recent Blu-ray collection update, but it made sense to properly review it in a separate video. So 4 filmmakers from completely different backgrounds bring their radically personal takes to the stories of Japan's celebrated master of the macabre, Edogawa Rampo, a Japanese author who was greatly inspired by Edgar Allen Poe, hence his name. Produced by the same team behind Ichi the Killer and Uzumaki, and with a cast featuring some of Japan's top stars, including Tadanobu Asano and Ryuhei Matsuda, this anthology of 4 short films evokes the erotic grotesque worlds created by Japan's pioneering proponent of horror and mystery fiction. So Edogawa Rampo was a pretty big name back in the day, and this kind of brings together some of his ideas and stories here. So I will briefly discuss each short film in a minute, but I want to give like an overall review first. So I would say all 4 of these short films have a few things in common, and that would be excellent set designs, lighting, and camera work. So they look very cool, and they provide a lot of like visual splendor. And some of the imagery is pretty unique, and you're not going to see this type of stuff in many films. They're practically worth watching for that alone. Now, another similarity between these films is that Tadanobu Asano appears in all of them, although his screen time varies significantly. So, for example, he's the main character in 2 of the stories, a supporting character in another, but he only has kind of like a cameo in the last or the other one. And I've mentioned Asano a bunch of times on my channel. You'll likely be most familiar with him from the films Ichi the Killer and Vital, amongst others. So if you like him, it's another reason to watch this. The total runtime here is 2 hours and 14 minutes, which is long for a horror movie, but the anthology structure helps to mix things up because you're not stuck on one story for too long. Now, one warning I would give you regarding Rampo Noir is that it's very artsy-fartsy, as I like to say sometimes, and it's weird. So you have more of like a deliberately paced style of storytelling, and it's like an oddball flick. The marketing described it as erotic grotesque, and it's a good description. The closest comparison I can make to something like this would be like Strange Circus, the film from Shion Sono. They have a similar vibe. So the first story here is called Mars Canal, which is directed by music video director and visual artist Seguru Takuchi, who I'm not that familiar with. He's only done a few movies. So within absolute silence, a naked man wanders through a dark and depressing landscape, recalling the excruciating details of his last encounter with a former lover. So this is the shortest story of the whole bunch. It's only 6 minutes long. But it is pretty disturbing, I think. Artificially devoid of sound. There's almost no noise or music in this at all until like the very end, which incorporates like a disorienting static sound. And there are some pretty creepy images presented. It is like a cool otherworldly environment as well. Now, does this make sense? It's pretty open to interpretation, but it is interesting regardless because it's experimental and you could draw your own conclusions from it. Probably the most divisive segment, I would say, but it's only 6 minutes long, so a pretty nice little start to the anthology, in my opinion. I enjoyed it. The second story is called Mirror Hell, which is directed by Akio Jisoji, a man who has consistently made some very artful films over his career. I featured his Buddhist trilogy in a Blu-ray collection video a few years ago. Haven't really gotten a chance to review those. I also reviewed Tokyo: The Last Megalopolis in a separate video. So the plot of Mirror Hell is when a series of women are discovered with their faces burnt and skulls charred, a young detective investigates, discovering that a unique hand mirror is always found at the scene. So we kind of begin with like a pretty neat opening shot here of mirrors sitting on the beach. And this film is like very stylish in an old school filmmaking type way. Very nice use of natural sunlight. Feels almost like inside the house, the natural light almost feels like it's being reflected like off of the floor, almost as if mirrors were used off screen, which would be, thematically consistent. The highlight shots, though, in this one is there's some shots where there's like a ton of mirrors in view, but they somehow kept the camera from being exposed, even though they're filming in a room full of mirrors. So I thought there's some pretty cool sets in this one. The story really revolves around the mystery. Pretty difficult to get into at first, but it gets stronger as it progresses, and the method of death is unique, and the reasoning behind the deaths are pretty insane. Very bizarre. You could definitely feel the Edgar Allen Poe inspiration here. And so this is a good one here. A little bit on the slow side, although most of these are. The third story is called Caterpillar, directed by Hisayasu Sato, a man who is known as an exploitation director. I've mentioned him quite a bit on this channel, actually, mostly within my Asian horror playlist, but I have done separate reviews for Naked Blood and The Eye's Dream, both of which I enjoy a lot. A war hero returns home with no limbs and only his eyesight remaining. His beautiful wife, tired of taking care of him, turns to torturing her crippled husband for amusement. So as you might expect from this director and the premise, the violence in this one can get a little disgusting, perhaps. There's also a filthy sex scene in this one. I mean, this is all... You should not be surprised if you're familiar with this director. And the ending is very demented. But it's quite disturbing, and the characters are odd enough to be interesting. This is the one where Ryuhei Matsuda is like a lead role. And again, we get some cool visuals. In every one of these short films, you get some cool visuals. There's almost like a first-person perspective of this man, and it reminded me of RoboCop, when he was like sitting in his, repair shop, and you see it shows it's slightly staticky, and you can't really talk and stuff. Very, very odd, but I quite enjoyed it. Great use of sunlight again as well. So, cool short story, but be prepared for less classy, more exploitative here. And then the fourth story is Crawling Bugs, directorial debut of manga artist Atsushi Kaneko, who's also only directed a few things. A sexy actress is returning home from a successful night on stage until her limo driver decides that she should be coming home with him. Now this is where Asano returns to a lead role, and he's allowed to really cut loose in this one. He has a lot to do, and fans of this actor will really enjoy his range of mannerisms and ability to convincingly express demented acts of violence. So this is the one where he's really showcased. Visually, we get some fancy urban settings and crazy set designs again. Very weird, gruesome, and unsettling film. Proficiently executed, though. You get this combination of visceral and psychological horror that comes together, and the ending is very macabre. So these last two shorts, like the Crawling Bugs and the Caterpillar, this is where it kind of ramps up, like the erotic, grotesque stuff. Whereas the first two films are a little bit classier. Alright? But I enjoyed all of these, and I would say Rampo Noir is a solid anthology. It contributes some very creative, weird, and refreshing elements. And if you're just getting into Japanese horror and you're watching movies with ghost girls in them a lot, this is one that's a nice change of pace. It'll get you exposed to a lot of the other elements to the genre. Currently streaming on YouTube, it also has a Region B Blu-ray release from Arrow Video. Let me know what you think of this one. I think this might be kind of a divisive type film given the style and pacing and stuff. But as always, folks, I'll see you next time.